getting ready for the incredible sound of classic rock? No? Good, because now it's time for Visiting the Village.
Hello and welcome to Visiting the Village. My name is Paul Kilduff-Taylor, and joining me once again is the irrumpant Ian Hardingham.
Yes, hello, I'm Ian Hardingham. Just returned from the Eurogamer Expo where I had to wear pants all of the time when talking to you. So now I'm happy that I'm back at home over Skype. I don't have to be wearing pants right now.
Let's get out of these pants / dungeon.
It's the top story.
Developer Digital Homicide are suing 100 Steam users for around $18 million after their staff have received abuse via Steam. Valve have responded by removing their games which include Paranormal Psychosis, Gnarl Tooth's Revenge, and Krog Wars, among many others. The same people are also suing YouTuber Jim Sterling after he made several videos criticizing their output. Can Digital Homicide get any more farcical, and just what are they doing?
This is pretty bad. I understand they may be upset with people being rude about their games on Steam, but can we just remember the really important thing that we've been fighting for on the internet for the last 5 years or so? It's that the people who run a platform such as Twitter or Facebook or indeed Steam should not be responsible for the comments and the posts people make on those platforms, because if you make the holders of the platforms responsible, you basically mean they have to start policing it in a way that's bad freedom of speech. So while I'm not a fan of people making racist or sexist or really, really rude comments about anything in any place, it's important that they are able to do that. And, you don't sue them for doing it, or indeed suing the platform holder either. So just as right off the bat, no, don't sue people for making rude comments on the internet. Sort of get a thicker skin.
I feel like Digital Homicide are, and this is going to be a bad analogy, so I just want everyone to get ready for this right now. They're almost Trump-like. I'm sorry, because what they've done is they've transcended the sort of normal idiocy. They're not as successful as Trump, and they're not doing it in a way which has a coordinated strategy. So I said it was a poor analogy, but they are doing things which make no sense. They're doing things which have no obvious positive outcome for them. They have obvious negative outcomes for them and for other people. I mean, irrespective of what you said about freedom of speech, which I think is, it's an innately contentious issue. I think some people would say that they've been fighting for greater platform holder responsibility in the year of Luigi. But what Digital Homicide are doing is just, it doesn't make any sense to me. I heard the famous Skype call with Jim Sterling, where the guy was ranting and raving about how he's trying to take a stand against all this kind of thing. It seems like they have some kind of weird crusade that is just internally consistent to them but makes no sense. That's the only explanation I have.
I'm going to channel the great basketball player Michael Jordan, and I'm going to say that Trump fans buy computer games too. So I'm not going to say anything rude about Trump right now. I'm really glad that you told me that Jim Sterling is a YouTuber, because I had him mixed up with Bruce Sterling, the legendary sci-fi writer, and I was slightly wondering why they were suing him as well. They've had their games removed from Steam. This is a problem for them. I find it hard to believe that a significant proportion of their sales didn't come from Steam, and they've now been taken off that platform, and it's unclear where they're going to go from here. I had no idea that they'd made so many games.
I mean, they're a sort of fairly well-known shovelware house.
Right, maybe they don't need Steam anymore. I mean, it's all very well doing this kind of stuff as a PR strategy, or as a way of just getting attention, but if the primary place where people would buy your games isn't selling your games anymore as a result, it seems like it might not work. Sometimes being in the headlines is bad. there's not much else for me to say about this. Suing people for making anonymous comments on the internet is clearly a silly thing to be doing. And suing Steam and a YouTube as well, it's too many things at once. I mean, maybe you can get some attention by suing the YouTuber just on its own. In some ways, I'd quite like to see people trying that and seeing what happens. But suing the users and suing Steam, I just don't see any upside.
That's why I kind of want to get beyond this. Like, there obviously is no upside. It's just what would motivate. Like, how could you get to the position where you think that this is the right thing to do? It's an almost religious kind of fervor that they have some principle that they feel is being violated. They just seem to be very. I mean, you said get a thicker skin. It's sort of, that's almost like saying, come into this universe and live here because it's interesting here. They are on a different plane of existence, and I find that fascinating.
Absolutely. I mean, I guess I'd like to say we'll keep following this story, but I'm not sure anything else is going to happen.
Well, the Jim Sterling thing is still ongoing. He made some quite funny tweets, basically saying the thing I'm not allowed to talk about is happening to someone else, which is kind of the gist of his response to it. I mean, they're incredible. They are an incredible thing. I think they're definitely another weird artifact of the openness of Steam. I think the floodgates have been opened now, and you're going to get some people who have, let's say, beliefs which are divergent from mainstream beliefs, very divergent on there, and this kind of thing is going to happen. I'm amazed by a legal system which allows this to occur as well, but that's a topic for another day.
Yes, it is.
A while back, Shuei Yoshida from Sony made some very interesting comments about No Man's Sky. The football was kicked around somewhat at the time, but we didn't get to talk about it, so we're going to revisit it. Here's what he said in an interview with Eurogamer. He said, "I understand some of the criticisms of No Man's Sky, especially that Sean Murray is getting, because he sounded like he was promising more features in the game from day one. It wasn't a great PR strategy because he didn't have a PR person helping him, and in the end he is an indie developer. But he says their plan is to continue to develop No Man's Sky features and such, and I'm looking forward to continuing to play the game." What do we think is going on here?
Well, I've talked to you about this extensively, and you've told me that you just think that Mr. Yoshida tends to talk quite a lot, and tends to not worry too much about what he's saying. So I guess that's what's going on here. I'm a bit surprised. I would expect Sony to just talk about how great No Man's Sky is. From my perspective, I don't think there's any need for the platform holder to apologise in any way, which this is kind of getting towards a tacit apology from me, or at least throwing Sean Murray under the bus. I'm not sure why you would need to throw him under the bus for your most successful game launch this year, but there you go. So I think this is a bit tactless. I think Sean Murray is probably unhappy about this, and he's not the kind of person to come out in public and start fighting back, as I understand it.
No.
So I think this is a little unprofessional.
This is very difficult. I'm going to have to say that I think I might have changed my mind on this somewhat. So I originally kind of identified this as what Shuei Yoshida does, as you implied in your introduction, is that he generally is fairly open with the press. He is a point of contact for Sony with the outside world. He's a friendly face. And that's really, really good. It's a strategy that's worked very well for Nintendo. Sony have been sort of making great bounds with this. Microsoft used to do it a bit more than they do now. They have a sort of single spokesman. And in general, it functions very well. He's a very well-known guy. He's extremely likable. He'll talk to developers as well as to the press. He's a good point of contact. And I think with that comes just, there are some necessary problems. Someone is going to say something that isn't perfectly crafted, that isn't a good statement, that doesn't reflect well on the work of some developers or the work that Sony's doing. It's going to happen sometimes, and I think this is one of those cases. When you actually look at what he said, I don't think there's anything to dispute there. It wasn't a great PR strategy, and the reason is that he didn't have a PR person. I think Sony, the extent to which Sony were responsible for the game's marketing and PR is something that hasn't been very well clarified to the outside world, and I wonder if it was very well clarified internally. I don't know. I'm not party to that information. But taken at face value, I think this kind of statement, while it's not what you would do if you were doing PR in a straightforward way, I don't actually think it's too bad.
I'm interested that you're willing to just say it was a bad PR strategy or not a good PR strategy.
Well, I think that's demonstrably obvious. I mean, part of PR is about how you frame and control your message. You don't want your message to get massively out of hand in a negative way. The fact that an extremely successful game is continually being portrayed as a horrendous failure is not good PR. There are aspects of the PR which were great. I think as an overall strategy, there were some very simple things, some very obvious things that could have been done to mitigate some of these problems, and they weren't done. So I agree.
I just think there's no way you can separate out the good from the bad. It may be that it was important for so many promises to be made for there to be such hype in the first place.
No, I think that there are ways, as I've said and written about, I think that there are ways that you can, for example, use caveats in your speech to make points more defendable if people take umbrage later on. And I think there are ways of doing disaster limitation, sort of message control. That's a big part of PR. And I don't think those things were done. I don't think it's an either-or situation. I think you're always going to get a situation with games like this where people are going to be disappointed. I think that's unavoidable. You can't prevent disappointment, but I think you could have prevented some of the worst stuff that we've seen from this.
Okay. I think it's interesting. I think that the entire tenor of I suppose you call it the strategy, the way they were presenting the game was to just show it off as this massive thing. Like, I can't see really a place where the general, this is a gigantic game with all these things going on in it, ends, and the bit where you could start putting caveats begins. Right from the initial trailer, which was surely the seed of everything becoming so hyped for this game, every part of that trailer is showing things which, for me, are the direct things people are responding to when they're getting angry. So I view their PR strategy as selling the experience as the best it could possibly be. And I'm not saying right here that it's not that specifically, but it seems to me that I do not believe there is a version of this strategy which doesn't make people angry.
Yeah, I completely disagree. I think that's totally wrong. One good example of that is multiplayer. I think it was very obvious early on to some people within that structure that multiplayer was not going to happen in the way that people wanted. And I think you can come out and say the game does not have traditional multiplayer, which is what they ended up saying if you look at the way the message changed throughout. I think that could have been headlined earlier, and I think it could have shut down a lot of the negative stories. One of the biggest stories that dominated around launch was this issue with players meeting each other. And that is the kind of thing you want to head off. I don't think it's a necessary artifact of everything else, mostly because it's unrelated to everything else. It's not the feature that people were focusing on, particularly initially. It's not the feature that people were focusing on from the trailers. So I think, as I've spoken about before, that's a singular example of where you can have a stronger message and you can head off some of these problems. I do agree with you. People are going to be disappointed if you present a game in this way and develop a game in this way. Whatever you think about that, you're right. People are going to be disappointed. But that doesn't mean that there aren't good, obvious structural things that you can do to make it better.
I think that the multiplayer thing was a symptom rather than a cause. I think people were generally disappointed based on all of the things they'd come to believe about the game. That what they wanted to do was find specific things that they could prove. All of their general vague sense of disappointment was to do with things that were hard to describe. It was like, this scene in the trailer made me feel like X was going to happen, but it didn't happen. So what people wanted to do was then galvanize around a thing that was provably wrong. And in this case, it was the multiplayer. That was the most egregious thing they found that was basically provably wrong. I think if the multiplayer thing had never been talked about, or been talked about in a more effective way, they would have just found something else to focus on.
I don't know. I mean, you're basically saying that everyone focuses equally on multiplayer if you make that argument, which I don't think is true.
What was that, sorry?
You're basically saying that all players focus equally on their desire for multiplayer, for that to be true.
Can you explain that? I don't understand that point.
Sure. So people look for different features in a game. Some people look for the multiplayer and some people look for the single-player experience when they're looking whether to buy a game. And I think that there is a group of players who specifically wanted a multiplayer experience. While I agree with you that I think people are going to pick on aspects that, as you say, are sort of falsifiable, I don't think multiplayer is actually in that category. I think it's too big.
It's interesting. That doesn't quite back up with what I was saying. So I'm saying that there were lots of people who were disappointed in general by the game, and they wanted to complain. They found the most effective way of complaining was finding something that was most demonstrably false. It's not about whether they were looking forward to the multiplayer or not. I think plenty of the people who complained about multiplayer had no real interest in the multiplayer, but they were just looking to that as like the most egregious thing that was in a whole sort of family of stuff that led towards their feelings of disappointment.
I think that's definitely true, but I don't think it's absolutely true. And this is where our two arguments really diverge. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but you're being very binary and absolutist about all of this. And I just don't think that's the right approach. And interestingly, I don't think that's the right approach to how you structure PR for something like this either. I don't think that you can address everything as a homogeneous mass of problems. I think that you have to focus on the things which you can address. And I do think it is worth doing those things. It's like, we come back to the presidential campaign. If you have areas of weakness, you can't possibly shut down every area of a candidate's weakness that the other side could attack. That's physically impossible. What you're trying to do is create an overall picture that people can buy into. And that's done by managing very specific tactical issues as well as you possibly can. And I think that's what's absent from this. I don't think it's right to treat this as an absolute.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think that the problem is not that the strategy wasn't good. I think the PR strategy was really good. I think it was possibly badly implemented or at times badly implemented.
Sure, okay, if you want to take that line of defining strategy in that way, then yeah.
So again, so I think it's really hard, just to sum up, it's so interesting for the platform holder to criticize the PR strategy for such a successful product in such a broad way. Now, it's a pity because we know some things about No Man's Sky which we're definitely not allowed to talk about, which are really juicy. And I think that this whole thing is fascinating. I mean, from our perspective as people who understand the business of games, No Man's Sky still seems like a real success. I think a large proportion of the people who've played it are really happy with it, one way or the other.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the casual people who played No Man's Sky and who only bought a couple of games this year and bought No Man's Sky because they saw it on late night TV or something like that, I think they found it really intriguing. I've seen lots of people writing articles about how they have lots of problems in No Man's Sky, but they've played it for 40 or 50 hours, which also seems great. And also, I have to say, a little unusual in these cases of games that have massive hype pre-release and then have a mixed response. A lot of people disliking it, in inverted commas, and then playing it for a long period of time. That's not, I think, the most regular thing that happens there. There are lots of people who play it for a little bit, enjoy it a lot for an hour, and then kind of quietly go off again.
Yeah.
And that's definitely the opposite of what's happened here. So, coming back to the root of why we're talking about this thing that's been said by Mr. Yoshida, it's just such an unusual thing for the people in the business to be criticising.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And it's also very interesting, what we've done there is had a sort of significant discussion around effectively some of the wording in this quote. But again, what I said at the outset is this is very offhand. He says it wasn't a great PR strategy because he didn't have a PR person helping him. Now, I've taken the inference because he didn't have a PR person helping him, the tactical management of this being a component of the strategy. And what you've done there is separated out what you see as a macro strategy, be vague, effectively, from that tactical implementation. I think we both agree that the tactical implementation could be better. But that's what happens when you get these offhand comments. It's not a considered comment. It's not very well structured. It looks like he's saying everything is bad, whereas what he's specifically saying is because he didn't have a PR person helping him. He didn't know how to message and phrase certain things. He didn't know how and when to respond. And these are tactics. So, yeah.
Yeah, I am sort of somewhat amused by the irony of Mr. Yoshida making a comment that's been taken quite out of context. While talking about this.
Yeah.
This reminds me a little of my mother does occupational psychology, and she's used to giving out feedback forms where you give aspects of your job or the job that you've done or someone else a mark out of 10. And basically, the only numbers that matter are 7, 8, 9, and 10. Basically, as soon as someone gives something less than 8, it means it's terrible.
Yeah.
No one ever gives something in these questionnaires a 4 or a 5. 7 means terrible. The reason why people pay such a huge amount of attention to what Sony is saying here is because it's incredibly rare for anything negative to be said. So as it's totally true what you say, which is that really, when you actually think about what's being said here, it's very minor. It's not that negative, but it's still in really stark contrast to what we're used to. I think almost everyone listening to this podcast would like there to be more candidness around, for people to be able to have more honest opinions about what they think. But that's not really the world we live in for lots of different reasons. So it's interesting.
Also, there's a final interesting meta PR point here. What you can't see, and I don't think you can see this in the original article, I should probably check this because my entire point hinges on this. Yes, you can't see the question. And when you're being interviewed, every answer you give, you should understand that people will not be able to see the question. It's something they use in reality shows a lot. You see the kind of talking heads of the person. And the question they've been asked is clearly, what's the worst thing about Dave? And they'll start by saying, oh, Dave does this terrible thing where he puts his legs behind his head and he squats like a chicken. And it looks like that person is the kind of person that brings up criticisms of someone else apropos of nothing. But in fact, they're not doing that. So here, there's no question. So you can't see, maybe the question was, this is the world's worst PR strategy, wasn't it? And he said it wasn't a great PR strategy to mitigate it. Probably not, because it's Eurogamer. They don't ask sort of trap, nasty questions like that. But again, that's something you have to be aware of. So yes, the irony around this is strong.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It would be really nice if it was the law that you had to state the question any time that you put an answer, because in some ways, putting an answer to that question is just out of context, which people understand is rude. And it's not even something that I noticed, but I completely agree.
I mean, it was interesting seeing all these interviews with Sean Murray and seeing just how little he wanted to be at any of them. It's really unusual to see a developer in such a high-profile situation who clearly does not want to be there and is clearly getting very little out of it personally and generally hates the whole experience. So doing PR from that basis, whether you call that strategy or not, I don't think is good. I think either you should embrace it or you should get someone who wants to embrace it and put them in those situations.
Fair enough.
Hideo Kojima has criticized Konami's decision to add zombies to Metal Gear Survive. He said, without quoting the question, the Metal Gear games are about political fiction and espionage. Where do zombies fit in with that? I'm presuming he made sort of a shape a bit like that shrug emoticon after that. Should he just accept that he's now lost control of the franchise?
No, I don't want him to accept that, because I want him to keep commenting about every aspect of Metal Gear. I really want him to have a blog where every day he talks about his beef with Konami and the ongoing decisions they're making to do with Metal Gear. Having said that, and I would certainly almost always side with Kojima on almost anything, him criticising them for putting zombies in a Metal Gear game is pretty rich.
Yes, it is.
The guy has put every single weird trope imaginable into his games, and I love them for that. I actually wanted to talk more broadly about this thing that they're doing. This game, this Metal Gear Survive, is sort of a expand-alone to Metal Gear Solid 5, an attempt by them to take that incredibly rich engine and game and make some more stuff in it. I am not a zombie guy, but I am kind of interested in them doing this and what this looks like, and I may even have to play this because I really love Metal Gear Solid 5 so much. I really kind of want to see what they're doing. They're basically making a professional mod of this game.
Yeah, so this is complicated. I'm not a Kojima guy. And like you say, these games have absolutely everything you can imagine in them, and some things that you can't imagine. So complaining about an individual edition is weird. However, if I am a Kojima guy, if I love Metal Gear, this kind of thing I think is just going to make me sad, because as funny as it is to see him on the outside sort of just flailing and complaining, I want things that are made by him. He's clearly a very unique-minded creator. There's no one like him, so I don't want to see things that are sort of made in his image. I want to see stuff with his hand on the tiller.
I mean, they're moving beyond this, which is a sort of a slightly weird side product. Moving forward, Konami are going to have no chance of capturing the real spirit of Metal Gear's wacky lore without Kojima. I just think that's impossible. I mean, I don't even know who you would have to hire. I mean, would it have to be the guy who did Pan's Labyrinth and Hellboy?
Del Toro.
Yes, that's right, Guillermo. if Hollywood were trying to replace someone like this, you'd have to go with someone else very well known who had a very distinctive style that was also liked by fans of the original person. Because if you just try and get writer by committee to ape the style of Kojima, I just think it's going to feel empty.
Yes.
So, in terms of what Konami do moving forward, I both hope and expect that Metal Gear 6's Plus, if they are made, will be a lot straighter. And that's going to be kind of all right. But sure, I agree, every part of this is sad. If you're a true Metal Gear believer, this is the end of Metal Gear, and Kojima may do some interesting stuff moving forward. He's not ever going to be able to make a game as big as Metal Gear Solid 5 again. I'm really sure about that. Not only because the amount of money required for that is huge, but also because he has talked endlessly publicly about not really wanting to anymore.
Yeah.
And even if deep down he could be persuaded if he was still at Konami, I can't believe he'll be persuaded to be put into that situation by someone else. So I think it is a little sad. I didn't view his comments as being sort of pathetic, particularly because I've played Metal Gear Solid 5 and his name is put on the middle of the screen every 10 minutes in that game. It's absolutely amazing.
Yes.
I kind of view his leaving Konami as a great troll move, and I kind of view him as being in control of the whole thing, even though that's not really true. I don't see him as a sad figure in this at all, so I just like him throwing Rotten Tomatoes while drinking whiskey from the side of the theatre.
Sure, I think he definitely wanted to get out, and he's done that. And that's good, you know. I think it's important to not be locked in and defined by these things. If you're at a certain point in your career, you have to make that step to get out, even if nobody else in the world wants you to. You have to do that. So I think he's done that, and yes, more power to him. Yeah, it's a sad time. If you're a fan, then there's nothing good to come out of this. I agree. I don't think he's going to make a game like that again. He'll probably make something weird. It might be good. I think there's a reasonable chance of it being good. If someone gives him the right resources, the right team around him, and the right structure, it could be good. So there is that to look forward to, I suppose, and he'll certainly bring with him a lot of fan attention in that direction. So that's fine. But yes, it's the end of Metal Gear.
Yeah, I just as a final point, one of the things that made Kojima's games, the Metal Gears, so amazing, it's not just about his authorship, because I can't remember his name, but the guy from Grasshopper Studios, Killer 17, etc. Now, he's an author, and he's made lots of very, very interesting aesthetic games, and he's sort of like, you know, kind of like a John Carpenter or someone like that. You know what you're getting with his games. He's very, very distinctive. What really set Kojima apart was that all of his games had easily as much character and disruption as that, but they were also incredibly progressive and disruptive games. These games have always been on the forefront of technology one way or another, on the forefront of gameplay. There's a big difference between making a half-hour walking simulator that does something new and making the next big FPS that also does something new. Those two things are really different, and just I cannot put into words how much I love every part of Metal Gear Solid 5, and a big part of that is just how much of a massive game it is.
It's a crazy
So there
game,
you go.
and yes, we may not see it like it's like again. A YouTuber with more than 1.3 million subscribers has been charged with promoting gambling using FIFA Ultimate Team coins. Craig Nepenthes Douglas has been charged with promoting a lottery, advertising unlawful gambling, and inviting children to gamble, according to BBC News by way of Eurogamer. Is this going to continue to get worse?
I don't know if it's peaked yet. I think it's really interesting that this gambling thing is the problem with YouTubers right now.
Yeah.
I think there are quite a lot of sort of issues raised with the changes that YouTube personalities, Twitch personalities bring. And I'm kind of just surprised that the first one that's really stuck as a problem is this gambling thing. Gambling is a really big deal. Children gambling is a really big deal. But it did make me think of Pogs, which really are a gambling game. You have these collectible things, and when you play Pogs against someone else, you are gambling your Pogs against theirs in what is essentially a game of luck. And it made me think of that because all of these gambling sites to do with CSGO and here with Ultimate Team, you're not gambling money directly, generally. You're gambling some weird in-game currency or items. So I don't really know where the moral line is. promoting a gambling site that you own without stating that is clearly past the line, though. So maybe he's going to get prosecuted.
Well, unless I'm misunderstanding this, it is done for money. Like, the purpose of this is to win money.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you cash out? Do you think most people cash out?
Oh, yeah.
Immediately? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, that's... as far as I understand it, if I'm wrong, let me know. But that was my assumption. The Gambling Commission said, we are paying close attention to the growing popularity of virtual or in-game items which can be traded, sold, or used as virtual currencies to gamble. If GB-based players are being invited to gamble with money or money's worth, which is an interesting phrase, very British, that requires an operating license. So it's this invitation to gamble thing, and inviting people to do something is the power of YouTube. These people have a lot of power of their fan bases. They can tell them to do things, and they will do them. Most of the things that have happened with YouTube in this way have been quite benign so far, but I think we could see worse stuff. I'm going to say I do think it's going to continue to get worse. Everything's really behind the times with this. Even the news sort of just catching up with it as a regular issue. Mainstream news, the Gambling Commission there sort of making their first early statements on it. I think it's a big problem. I mean, we were at an event recently and I saw in person some YouTubers who'd been involved with various gambling controversies out there, doing signings and hugging fans and stuff. The consequences of this have not hit yet. So I don't think there's any reason why this has peaked.
Right. Yeah, we need some landmark cases so everyone takes it seriously and people will start writing articles giving really close details about what you can and can't do. It's kind of it's the rise of two separate things at once: the rise of YouTubers and casters, and the rise of like the easy ability to gamble with these in-game currencies / things happening kind of at the same time, and that's causing sort of twice the problems. There's not much else to be said about it. There's not really much interesting here. I doubt many of our listeners would be campaigning for the YouTubers to have the freedom to do this, for instance. No, it doesn't seem to be anything particularly sort of questionable here, just stuff that we think people should probably not do. I've always found in-game currencies to be pretty strange as a concept, but they're just getting more and more important, and it doesn't even have to be a currency. It can just be weapons such as in CSGO. But as these games become more and more platforms, places where you're spending sort of 10 hours a week, of course they're going to have these internal currencies, and it's going to take a while for the law to catch up. But I'm confident it will.
One of the things that depresses me about this is it's just greed. It's the same thing, lots of streamers taking sponsorship from G2A and key resellers and not even knowing what those sites do. It's just greed. People come along and they offer you opportunities to make money, or you spot an opportunity to make money, and you don't even slightly think about the consequences. And the defense that is always going to get used in future, we're going to see this happen. These people are going to get older and they're going to say, oh, I was young and I didn't understand business. I didn't understand. That is bollocks. You're perfectly capable of understanding these things. You're just greedy and lazy. You didn't take the time and make the effort to understand what you were promoting. And I think it's abhorrent. And I really want to see some consequences happen because these people have so much power. They have power over very young, genuinely young, impressionable kids who really don't know better. But these are people in their early 20s. They're adults. They need to sort this stuff out.
Could not agree more. Shots fired, Taylor.
VR shooter Raw Data has broken records and the $1 million revenue barrier in a single month. Does this mean VR is a more important niche than you and I thought?
I don't make that conclusion, personally. I think there are a lot of people who have VR headsets, and I think those people also tend to have money. And I think they are looking for well-produced new experiences that they can have with their VR helmets. I think now is a great time to spend 6 months making a good, mildly interesting experience in VR that is attractive to core gamers. I think Raw Data is something like that. The fact that they can make $1 million in a month, I think it's probably fair to say that we might have doubted that the ceiling was that high right now.
Sure.
So I think it's an impressive number. I think we're going to see loads of VR games come out, and I think for a year and a half or so, maybe 2.5 years, it's going to be a really fertile place to make lots of money. If you look the right kind of thing. Like, I think you need to have good graphics, and I think you need to be selling some immersion, both of which this game does very, very well. I do think that as consumers start to understand the limitations of the hardware, the gold rush on this stuff will end. But yeah, I think this indicates that there is a gold rush right now, which previously I might not have realised there was.
Okay, some things here. I think that one of the things that's interesting about this game is that it is an attractive-looking, very sort of standard game. It's a sci-fi core shooter, as you say. It's something that's if you play games and you own a VR headset, you're going to buy this because you'll want the FPS for your Vive. So what a great thing to do. Lots of people doing experimental stuff. That's great, wonderful. But we're going to make a game. We're going to make a really solid game. It's going to have guns and shooting in it. Yeah, and just do that. That's a great strategy. I think.
Yeah, this reminds me of the first time an FPS came out on the Wii.
Yeah, I was just going to say
people were like, "Is there a place for this on the Wii?" And every Wii owner ever was like, "Yes, this is exactly what I want."
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's that bringing something very generic to a very new place is actually a great strategy if you're an early adopter of tech, if you're an early developer. So props to the devs for doing this. Very good, very clever move. And apparently it's a good game. The thing you said about consumers realizing the limitations of the hardware, that's interesting because that definitely happened with the Wii as well. People knew it wasn't going to deliver the kind of thing they wanted. They wanted sort of realistic sword controls and stuff like that. It couldn't do that. Well,
I don't necessarily think that has to go hand in hand with a consumer being disappointed. I think it may well be that VR could fulfill a lot of the things that you're looking for. But I think that the gold rush is where you feel like sort of almost anything's possible and you want to buy new products to kind of extend your reach. And then sort of gradually you'll start to understand the specific limitations of the platform, like what kind of stuff works well and what kind of stuff doesn't. You'll start to suspect that a certain game promising a lot will not work for these kind of reasons, and then that sort of slowly will taper your willingness to just buy willy-nilly. Sorry for interrupting.
That's okay. No, well, that's all directly relevant to what I'm talking about. It's been purchased by at least 1 in 5 Vive owners, and that's really amazing. I mean, that's really, really good. I still not tried a Vive. Everyone who knows anything about VR is screaming at me that you cannot have an opinion until you've tried a Vive. I'm going to try and do that very soon. It definitely looks like this game makes a lot of use of the physical positioning of your hands within the space, which is the Vive's sort of amusingly unique selling point, although Oculus apparently can do that as well. Any opinions on the Oculus versus Vive situation at this point?
Well, I don't know if this PR problem with Palmer Luckey is going to matter. I could honestly go both ways on that. I would side with that's not going to severely impact Oculus, but it's a lot of people who are going to be early adopters of tech like this are not going to be happy about that story about him funding strongly right-wing internet groups to make rude comments or something, and might be turned off Oculus just for that reason. Beyond that, I want to put this carefully. I think the Vive looks brilliant. I'm not at this point clear what Valve are going to be doing with it in 5 years. I think it's actually possible that Oculus will have a more guaranteed longer term support. And while it feels like the Vive has definitely won this round, I wouldn't be surprised if Oculus was the only one competing in round 3 of the two of these.
Yes. I think that's possible. I also definitely think Valve don't know what they're going to be doing with it in 5 years. I think they would say that they haven't figured out what they wanted to figure out from releasing it. I'm pretty sure of that. They probably have some plans, but I don't think they can know where the market's going. As you say, Oculus, they have obviously the backing of a huge organization behind them. They were always trying to look for more mainstream success. Stuff like PSVR. I always see PSVR as just a really nice PlayStation add-on and nothing else. And that may be unfair to it. That may be unfair to it. I mean, and when I say really nice PlayStation add-on, I can't wait to get one. I mean, it's going to be great. So
yeah, that's no intended slight at all. It's just that we're putting it in the same category of things as the Kinect
Yep.
or the Motion Plus, really successful things that are specifically
Yes.
a hardware add-on for a games console and not a new way of interacting with your lunch.
Right, and to those who might be new to the podcast, Kinect is not a pejorative, as it's one of the most successful peripherals of all time, as we have to reiterate every time we mention it. Yes, so I think we agree on that. Does this change anything for me? I think it does. I think that in games, when you see someone make a lot of money, that changes everything. It certainly changed everything for indie games, PC indie games. When you started to see developers making a lot of money, that really changes how you think about it. If you're a teenager and you're thinking of doing this, and your mum storms into your bedroom and says, "Why are you wasting your time with these computers?" You can go, "Look, this guy made $1 million." It really changes everything. So I think this might be a threshold moment. I think this might be bigger than we're making out here.
I could definitely buy that. I still have these underground feelings that this really isn't the generation for VR yet. There's been a lot of sub underground chatter about bringing back this glasses thing, just like the kind of the Google Glass stuff.
Yep.
What's Microsoft's technology? I heard someone raving about their on glasses technology. I just have this feeling, it's not something I go and lay down money on, but I have this feeling that that's the more disruptive technology at this point. We do kind of know what VR is right now, and I don't mean in terms of the market space. I think people do kind of have a vague idea about what can and can't be done with the current tech, and I do still think that the size of the headsets is a bit of a problem. So I think what you said is totally possible. I also think it's possible that we're still 15 years out, and it will be glasses that can switch quickly between showing you the real world and showing you a fully immersive view will be the thing that actually catches on.
Sure, there is a big problem with the headsets. I'm interested to see what PSVR does for comfort. Gear VR is pretty good, and I think probably actually the best. Again, not tried a Vive, but it looks enormous, so that's going to be a factor, I'm sure. So that comfort, usability, how it looks to the outside world, practicality of setting it up, or perceived practicality, heard very different things about the Vive from different people. Those things all matter a lot. The friction of how you use something, etc., etc. So yes, I agree. I'm going to go for, at the moment, I don't think VR is going to completely disappear and then come back again. I think it's going to evolve from here. And I believe I've said that before. That's my fairly strong opinion now. So we'll see if I'm right.
Yeah, we'll get off this shortly. Just a final point. It is possible for... Right now, we believe there are a lot of VR games in development. After the success of a game like Raw Data, there could be a lot more. I think it's still just about in play, though, that all the early adopters have got properly bored with the VR headsets by the time all of these games come out. And that would be interesting to see a rush of interesting VR titles in 18 months. And maybe that they've passed the crest of the wave at that point. I don't know if that's likely, but I guess just a possibility.
Most people I know who have a Vive are really into it still and really want new stuff for it. It is possible that they're bored by then. I suspect not, because I think there's quite a lot of innovation sort of within the space to happen. I think there are probably new and interesting things that people can do. If people are really staying with it as a platform, there's always depth to add to games. These early things are not going to have that much depth. So I guess I don't think that's going to happen, but I also agree that it's possible. The novelty could wear off, and the practicality of using it could be the problem there. So yes.
Could wear thin. All right.
Gama Sutra has a list of strategy games that every developer should study. How upset are you that Frozen Synapse wasn't on the list?
Not too upset if they're taking a narrow definition of the word strategy.
I mean, they had DEF CON, so...
They do have DEF CON, which I think was some kind of editorial mistake.
We love you. We love you, Chris and Mark.
They also have Homeworld, which... you can go both ways on Homeworld. So I'm just going to list this real quick. Now, DEF CON and Homeworld are two of the more obvious ones. There's a really interesting old game called Reach for the Stars, which has some really nice two-color graphics. Possibly the first commercially published 4X game. I'm actually going to try and look that one out. A game called The Lords of Midnight.
Very famous game.
Which I think you can now get for your Android and iPhone device. Now, I do think I remember this one. I think this is one which tried to write personalities into the AIs for the first time and sort of went more in that direction than most games have since, really. Because most people who are developing games find that unpredictable AI stuff stops them from doing all of the easy things they want to do in games. That's something that I'm trying to get past as well. A game called Oasis, which I remember coming out in the 90s. Apparently 2005. Maybe I don't remember that.
No.
Unity of Command and Dawn of the Zeds 3rd edition. I was interested. It's quite an enigmatic list. Yes. What do you think about this?
Yeah, this is good. I like, X things that are essential where they're all pretty obscure. That's a good thing to do. Homeworld's fairly famous, but and DEF CON, I think, made a silly joke about it. DEF CON had some really interesting stuff that hasn't really been replicated. That kind of big number of players on a sizable map, but then not sort of massively long game time, and quite a lot of aesthetic stuff. DEF CON is a unique game, and perhaps worthy of study, I think. Yeah, no, I like this a lot. It's nice to see these older, more obscure games. As I've endlessly talked about, I'm really addicted to ancient DOS games and its companion series Shovelware Diggers at the moment. And seeing what loads of games from the early 90s did, and the way that they innovated on gameplay is really, really interesting. And I think if you're developing games now, it's worth going back then and looking at the sort of trends and the weird things people try to do around that time. So I like this. I find it difficult, when people say things like, you have to play this game in order to understand X. That's really difficult because playing a game is such an enormous amount of commitment, and playing one of these big strategy games to really understand the game, I think takes many, many hours of gameplay. So it's very difficult to be a sort of well-read designer, I think.
Yes, it is. And how hard is it to have an authentic experience when you're playing these games as well? I mean, we only fall in love with a small percentage of games, and I think especially with games like this, you haven't really experienced the full extent of it unless you've kind of fallen in love with it. So I feel like I know Alpha Centauri in and out, but I certainly don't know the Settlers 2 in and out. Yeah. I liked one of those games, and the other one was fine, but I just didn't particularly get on with it. I like Prison Architect a lot. I didn't quite get on with DEF CON. You can't really research these games too thoroughly, and in all honesty, I tend to find that kind of thing bad as a designer. Because those emotions can get in the way in the wrong way. It's hard to make something individual and good when your head is so crowded with all of the feelings that you want to emulate from other games. But then game designing is such a weird process anyway. But certainly if you are a strategy games writer for a magazine or something, I guess it's good to have an understanding of a lot of these games. It's relatively rare that I'm truly surprised by a mechanic or a thing in a strategy game nowadays. I'm looking forward to actually playing Off-World Trading Company because the emphasis that puts on a stock market or a market of values is something that I want to examine very carefully. Most games, as I think I've talked about before in this podcast, they like the idea of having a dynamic stock market or price market for things in a game, but they very quickly find that that's impossible to balance. And it's either fun and completely unbalanced, or it has to be pruned back to the extent that it's no longer really properly a market. So that's the next thing on my reading list, is to find out a game like Off-World Trading Company, which has, I am told, fully embraced that aspect, and see where that has taken them as designers.
Yeah, markets are very hard things for gameplay because they behave in such weird ways, and they can often be incredibly boring and then incredibly volatile. So, I can see where the problems are in that kind of thing. I mean, I've often wanted, in trading games, felt like I wanted the marketplace to respond more to the in-game stuff. Like in a sort of elite type game, if commodities become more or less valuable based on some aspect of the simulation rather than just sort of random values as they were in a lot of those older games. But then you think about that and you think, well, do I actually want that? You know, I might want to trade in iron or something, and then that becomes a very stagnant market and there's no margin, which would really ruin the game.
Yeah, at EGX, I was talking to Sunless Sea designer Liam Welton about this, and yeah, very interesting conversation along these lines. It's so rare that a market, as you're saying, matches up with what good game design is, and players desperately want to be able to trade in any game like this. They love trading, but what does that look like? What's the interface like? Spending a long time trying to work out the exact trade an AI opponent will accept is not actually that compelling. So trying to present these options in a way that's both faithful to the concept of trading and a market, and also fun to play, and in any way balanced, is really, really hard. And that's why I'm not interested in researching games which put markets and stuff in as a kind of aesthetic device, but certainly a game which spent a lot of time in early access trying to work out the kinks of that system and made it a central part of the game, like Off-World Trading Company did, is something I definitely want to look at.
One thing I do find with this stuff is that when people stop, maybe they try or they don't want to have a simulation-based market, what they then do tends to be bad. So just like randomizing the values around a certain point, obviously that's safe and you only have to balance the point, right? Like it's easy. You know, this thing always costs more here and then costs less here. So there's a trading route. But what I'd like to see more is a kind of, I guess, bad system where it's sort of outward in, so that you look at some interesting conditions, like maybe sometimes it's more expensive here and less expensive there, and then sometimes it isn't. Really crude. That's not actually based on a deeper simulation, so it doesn't introduce that level of entropy. But it's just a bit more interesting for the player than up or down values. I think a lot of designers really don't like that kind of compromise because it's sort of semi-aesthetic and it's definitely cheating. They either want simulated or they want nonsense. And I do think there is more things than that in the world.
Yeah, you're definitely right about that. Many an interesting quirk has not been added to a game because it felt too arbitrary.
Yeah.
And that's definitely true. I'm certainly guilty of things like that. As you mature, you hopefully come more to terms with putting stuff like that in. Having said that, again, it's hard to make some of those things work well. I'm going to play this game. I'm going to talk to you about it on the Games Talking segment next time.
Good.
And describe to you this market. I know, again, just to recap this story really quickly, XCOM Apocalypse was originally meant to have a commodities market as a very important part of the game. And it did end up being sort of more than just an interesting curio in the game. It didn't really work out to be central. But, you know, if you research and you start producing a lot of a certain kind of weapon and you sell it into the city's market, the prices do go down, and that's really interesting. That's something that works. You are having like this real effect on the weapons market because you're the first person to research these because you captured the right alien, and you're selling too many and you're flooding the market, and that's cool.
That's good. I almost got through this whole episode without mentioning Privateer, but I haven't. In Privateer, the way the commodities work is that you know you're going to be going from place X to place Y for a mission anyway, and then you can think about what's going to be in place Y. And this information isn't available, so you will have had to have visited there beforehand. So maybe you know there's a certain type of base at place Y, and place X sells something that they want. So you just buy a bit of it, take it with you on the mission, and then sell it. That's a really lovely way of doing a market, because it just enables you to have a bit of proprietary knowledge as someone who's explored that before that you can exploit to get yourself an extra 10-20% of money for doing the mission. Really, really nice way of doing it.
I like it.
That's the end of that. Analyst Daniel Ahmad tweeted a chart of Ubisoft's franchises. There's a lot of interesting stuff on here. Assassin's Creed is number one with 96 million units sold. And right down the bottom is the Anno franchise with 9 million units sold. Anything strike you on here?
This is cool. It's always nice to see some real sales figures from the big guys. You know, yes, there are things about this that I find interesting. Pets with a Z at the end has sold 25 million units. And Driver is there with 20 million units. There have been quite a lot of Driver games, but still 20 million is quite strong. Yeah, Rayman is here. Watch Dogs managed to sell 11 million. That's quite a lot. I'm not surprised there's a sequel coming out. And The Settlers has done pretty well as well. Yeah, I don't know if I made many strong conclusions from this. Just that it's really interesting to see all of the weird things that Ubisoft make and manage to sell to a lot of people.
Yeah, Ubisoft really know what they're doing with some certain things. It is interesting to compare these. Like, it's interesting to see that, Prince of Persia versus Just Dance. It's an interesting comparison. If you're a company, they've really sort of diversified across a lot of things, and yet they sort of seem to apply this almost cookie-cutter approach to stuff now. It is weird. Like, based on this, would you make any decisions about sort of the type of IP that works in big mainstream games? I mean, I guess like modern men with modern guns is a good thing to do still. All these Tom Clancy games and Far Cry are up there. Assassin's Creed being the most popular one, I think is a little surprising to me. I've always found the aesthetic of Assassin's Creed a bit odd, and I'm not quite sure why it resonates so well with people, but I guess it's a sort of crossover between fantasy and sort of modern-ish stuff, I guess.
I mean, they've spent a lot on marketing it. There have now been a lot of Assassin's Creed games. Yep. They do manage to release one major one a year, which certainly helps those units sold figures. Certainly. Rainbow Six just doesn't have as many entries, I do not believe. And Ghost Recon, I'm surprised that Ghost Recon has basically the same number of units sold as Rainbow Six, because that was always the less prestigious brand for me. But I think there have been more Ghost Recon titles in the past. I think, Far Cry having... more Ghost Recon titles recently, not in the past. Far Cry's doing okay. I mean, the fact that Assassin's Creed has sold 3 times as many units as Far Cry series, that's kind of interesting to me. Certainly the most recent Far Crys have done very well. But Assassin's Creed is the boss. I think that in general, when Ubisoft decide to make a new franchise, they know how to market it properly. And I think they know how to make a game which doesn't score too badly as well. I always thought Watch Dogs was a bit underwhelming. But obviously Watch Dogs is off to a good start. I might buy the sequel. It looks okay.
Yeah, I should try the later Assassin's Creeds. People have told me to try as a non-fan of Assassin's Creed, and I think I should do that.
Black Flag was cool.
Syndicate and Black Flag are the 2 people want me to try, so I think I'll probably do that. It's interesting. I kind of wonder how you get to beat Ubisoft, but they've really built themselves up over a long time into this position, and it's very impressive indeed. Ding. Finally, we're going to wrap up with Unseen64, which is a site about beta, cancelled, and unseen video games. They have a huge collection of stuff on here. It looks very interesting. You can go there and have a look around. I'm looking at Asterix in Egypt, which is a beta on the Master System. And I remember the Asterix and Obelix games on the Master System as being very good. So I'm surprised. What they've got here is beta screenshots, where, they hadn't finished the game yet. So if you like that kind of thing, you should go and check it out. Have you got anything to add about this?
Yeah, there wasn't anything specific here that caught my eye, but it is just really interesting to try and keep track of the games that weren't released. They've made some good articles. This is not... The guys who do this, they're not writing in English originally. I think they have to get people to translate them. I think it's Italian, possibly Spanish, that they're writing in originally. There are so many interesting games that don't get released. There are a few that keep getting talked about in kind of Edge retrospectives and that kind of thing. But there are an awful lot that don't happen. And they're a really interesting part of our heritage as an industry that obviously is very hard to access. So it was just a site that I saw some interesting stuff on and I wanted to pass along, really. I mean, certainly I think it was originally designed to be about Nintendo 64 games, predominantly. And they've since branched out from there. I saw something about the various stages that Twilight Princess, the Zelda game that was released on the Wii, went through. And it's easy to forget. Some of these games start off looking completely different to the game that's actually released. Yeah,
there's some really interesting stuff on here. I found a cancelled Banjo-Kazooie game for the GBC called Banjo-Kazooie Grunty's Curse. which
Awesome.
looks really interesting. But by far the most notable thing about this is that the entire design document is in Comic Sans, which I think is probably the ultimate way to curse your game's development. There we go.
Absolutely.
That's enough of that. Now, we've got the games that were released this week in 2006, except it's not this week. It's the older week. And I have a slight feeling that it may be a week that we've done before. I think it is.
Hold on. Uh-oh. Yeah, this doesn't look good.
Yeah, so that's unfortunate.
We may have to skip this section
Mistakes
this
have
week.
been made. So we'll go straight to the Steam top sellers, which I shall read from Steam in order to prevent any similar problems with that. So at number 10, it's Total War. I want to just revel in being able to not do that feature for a single week. Just give me a moment. Right, number 10, it's Total War Warhammer. Number 9, it's Arma 3 Apex. Number 8 is Counter-Strike Global Offensive. Number 7, it's Sid Meier's Civilization 6, which isn't out yet. So that's impressive. Next is Arma 3 Apex Edition. At number 5, it's Cluster Truck. Cluster Truck, I've heard of before, but I haven't seen. Apparently, yes, surprisingly, it's a chaotic physics-based truck former. Good work there. Number 4 is Rocket League. Number 3 is Grand Theft Auto 5. Number 2 is Football Manager. And number 1 is Battle Right. A lot of buzz around this at the moment. It's the spiritual successor to, what's that game called? Bloodline Champions, I think it's called, which is one of those MOBA things.
Oh, okay.
People getting very excited about this. They're saying it's the next esport, etc., etc. It appears to be an indie developer, I think, Stunlock Studios. So... yes, Bloodline Champions is the thing. And wait a minute. They made Bloodline Champions. So that would be why... yes, that would be why people are saying it's the spiritual successor to that. So that's very interesting. And there is room for new entrants in this genre. Number 1 on Steam is a pretty powerful position to be in. So maybe something worth checking out if you like that kind of thing.
Well done.
Ending with the greatest game journalism cliche of all time. Listener questions, we're a bit sparse this week, mostly because I didn't ask. I'm a bad person. But remember, you can always send them to us apropos. Alex Connolly did. He wanted to discuss your points about Redux mods, where I believe you said that it's always a bad idea to make a Redux mod, both for the gamer and for the developer. So do you want to expand on that?
I don't think I went that far. Basically, I'm kind of boggled when people spend a lot of their lives making graphical Redux mods for games. I was spurred into saying this by the GTA 5 Redux mod that some people on my Twitter feed were playing. GTA 5 is still a very good looking game. And while I wouldn't want to criticize people for doing things in their spare time that they want to do, as long as they don't hurt anyone else, kind of wish they were spending their time making a more interesting kind of GTA 5 mod than this. And I've just never been I've never been interested in downloading the Oblivion graphical upgrade kit or Redux. I'm aware that you've had a good time with the Deus Ex one that's enabled you to play the game a bit better. Obviously, Deus Ex is pretty old, and with that game making it look better can be the difference between being able to play a game and not being able to play a game. I understand that, because Thief 1 and System Shock 2 are slightly in those boats right now. But certainly for more recent games, spending your time making high-resolution textures, I just am mildly baffled by that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, this seems to be like one of... So I don't understand people who spend a really long time like analysing frame rates and like little graphical features and comparing things. Like, I just find that completely mind-bogglingly alienating and dull. But people really want to do that, and it interests some people. And obviously, there's some practical relevance to it in that, you know, to make games graphically good, you have to know about all those things. So people care about it. It's so sort of orthogonal to the things I care about in games that I don't. So that's fine. And I respect people's right to do that. And this seems, it's not the same thing, but it seems sort of similar. Like, if the thing that you want to think about most is how to get incredibly high resolution stuff into a game and make it look a certain way, then that's what you're going to do. And I think that's what it's for. In terms of, like, would I play a modern game with a Redux mod? No, I wouldn't. but some people do, and I guess they're the niche audience for that. So to me, it seems like a completely benign thing. You said
it's definitely benign.
You said it seems like a colossal waste of everyone's time, especially the creators.
Yes.
Well, how does that gel, sir, with your recently revised opinion on the matter?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it does seem like a colossal waste of time.
Are you going to delete?
But so many things people enjoy doing are a waste of time. It's like most of life is a waste of time. So who am I to judge your activities?
That's very good. Very good answer. You're going to delete that tweet now? Or is it going to stay?
No, I'm not going to delete that tweet. I'm going to retweet it with a picture of your face on it.
That sounds good. All right. I don't think we have anything else to talk about. Oh, you've been watching The Night Of a lot. Do you want to talk about that?
What a great show. Sure. It's kind of old hat in the States now, because it came and went in the States before we had a chance to watch it here. It's on Sky or Now TV. I subscribe to Now TV. Really great. I thoroughly recommend it. It's not high art, but it is incredibly competent, compelling, just beautifully shot, wonderfully acted. Really, I think fair to say, very fresh. And I just basically couldn't stop watching it. It's 8 episodes, but the first and the last are an hour and a half.
Wow.
Every other one is 1 hour, so it's long, and it's just excellent. I mean, it almost isn't a single bad thing about it. There are kind of 2 minor storylines that aren't great, but it's just absolutely fabulous. Like the most kind of just basically enjoyable thing I've watched since True Detective, and actually I think it shares a lot in common with True Detective, because neither of them are high art. True Detective is actually extremely mainstream, even though it sort of pretends not to be. It's massively mainstream. And the same really is true of The Night Of, but it's so incredibly lushly done, so exciting. Like I didn't breathe for the whole of the first episode. It's so brilliant. So that's high praise indeed from me, and I'm sure you would like it too. Like you might not be so effusive as I, but it's quite hard not to like it.
What is it? What is it?
Oh, it's a new kind of cuddly toy from the makers of... No, it is a show. It is basically a show about someone who is wrongly accused of something, and whether or not he can be proven innocent before he is sent to jail, basically.
Sounds good.
Or before he is convicted. It is sort of at once very... sort of... At once kind of very generic and again sort of very ironic within that. It has I listened to some very good analysis of it, that it's sort of, it pokes a lot of fun at a lot of the conventions that you get from watching Law and Order, etc. And one of the nice things is that it does a lot of different things you'd expect, but each one of the things it does very fast and very well. The bit in the courtroom is not very long, and there's just some great bits of the witnesses kind of doing the objecting and asking the judge if they can do X, Y, or Z, all stuff that sort of comes from the characters in the show having watched Law and Order, and that sort of resonates really well.
Okay, that sounds great. Yes, I would like to check that out. I wish all of these things were on Netflix, where they should be.
I know, so do I.
Detective certainly should be on there. It's old enough, surely. Yeah, so I've been watching more Hannibal. I've got to the point where, and if you were planning to watch this and you haven't, please turn away now. We'll see you. We'll see you soon. Goodbye. This thing about the main character having this tumor, or no, he doesn't have a tumor. He has some kind of inflammatory brain. I mean, it doesn't matter because all the medical stuff is just complete nonsense, of course. But it's like, it's okay that he has that, and it's okay that it's concealed from him for a bit, but it goes on for a really long time, and it really violates the audience having more information than the characters. It doesn't make him more sympathetic. It's just annoying.
It definitely does. I'm a huge Hannibal guy, but I probably ought to just be clear. I find myself doing this kind of thing all the time. Series 2 is fabulous. Yeah. Series 1 is great, but you're right. There are a lot of things wrong with Series 1, and you're definitely talking about something that I shared being annoyed.
It's just like, it breaks some of the rules, but this is a rule that you should never break. this thing about the audience having more information than the characters for a really long time. You should never... It's the antithesis of drama. Well, now, that's not true. If it's done wrong, it can be the antithesis of drama, because it makes every action meaningless. If they just found out this information, they could do X. And it's fine in...
And Hannibal is already battling with enough of that from the fact that the audience knows that Hannibal's the bad guy. And no one else does. So it's not like they need any more of it.
So that's okay. So I feel like I've stopped watching it for the moment, mostly because of that. It would need to kind of push through that.
Yeah, I had a block with Series 1 as well. That's definitely fine, but it's totally worth getting through, because Series 2 is fabulous.
I shall be doing that. Eddie Izzard is great. I like everything with Eddie Izzard in any capacity, because he's kind of terrible in the same way and everything, but it's so watchable. I think he's based his whole career, both comedic and serious, on that. So
I'm surprised that he fits in to this show.
Well, it's so ridiculous all the time that he actually fits in perfectly. So there's that.
I mean, I think beyond all else, I just love the cinematography.
Yeah. It looks great. It's great.
The stylization and the shooting is just great, and they care so much about that. And as I said to you online recently, I also like that Hannibal's a real bad guy.
Yeah,
because in every other version of Hannibal, he's sort of a chaotic, evil sort of bad guy. So a good guy, but in this, he's really...
Yes, he does bad stuff all the time, and everything he does just benefits him alone, which is really good. Really great. So that's fun. I'm also watching The Thick of It again, which I've seen bits of before, but I've not sort of watched through every episode, and it's just phenomenal. It really sort of gets its voice as it gets going. It's extremely repetitive. I don't recommend watching it all at once, but if you like that kind of Armando Iannucci style humour, if you like kind of political satire stuff, it's definitely a worthy successor to Yes Minister, which is one of my favourite shows ever. It's really, really funny. It just has brilliant lines in it all the time and great performances. So The Thick of It, if you didn't watch that before or you're not aware of it, then I really recommend that as a comedy offering. There we go. That's enough of that. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you again next week. Goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.
That's it, children. Time for bed. Don't forget to pay us a visit at www.visitingthevillage.com.